Hi, I'm Trenton Kicksmiller, and this video is for AUT-150. Today we're going to teach you how to do an oil pressure test. The first thing you want to do when doing an oil pressure test is find the oil sending unit. On this Toyota 8-cylinder engine, the oil pressure sending unit is right here above the oil filter assembly. The oil pressure sending unit has an electrical connector here and a fitting here. The first thing that we're going to do for this oil pressure test is we're going to take off this electrical connector. Now that we have the electrical connector disconnected from the oil pressure sending unit, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually take this oil pressure sending unit fitting out of where it connects to the oil filter assembly. So when you take this fitting out, it's going to begin to leak oil. So what I have done is I have gotten another person to come and help me by plugging the hole so that we don't leak all the oil out of the engine. So I'm just going to take the correct wrench for this fitting, and I'm going to loosen it until it's finger loose. I'm going to take it out, and it's going to spill oil, but we're going to plug that hole immediately to try to save as much oil as we can. You ready? Now that we have the oil pressure sending unit off of the engine, we're going to come over to our oil pressure gauge set, and we're going to look at the fittings in the oil pressure gauge set. Now what we want to do, I already know what the correct fitting is for this, but what you want to do to find the correct fitting is you're going to test the threads to make sure the threads are the same size, and we're going to test to make sure that it's the same diameter. As you can see, this is the correct fitting for this oil pressure sending unit. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take this nipple and we're going to screw it into the end of this fitting, so this is what will connect to the oil pressure gauge. Now after we have the nipple secured into the fitting, what we're going to do is we're going to take the fitting and we're going to put it right into where the oil pressure sending unit was. Alright, you ready? Go. As you can see, we're going to leak a little bit of oil still. You're just going to thread that fitting in right where the oil pressure sending unit was. And you're going to securely tighten this down, not too tight. You're just going to securely snug it into where the oil pressure sending unit was, because you don't want to have any drip out of this fitting. Now the next thing that we're going to do, now that we have the fitting installed with our nipple on the end where the oil pressure sending unit was installed, is we're just going to install the oil pressure gauge onto the end of the nipple, just like you would any air system. Now, you're not going to have any oil pressure at all without the engine on. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn this engine on. As you can see, the oil pressure on cold startup is about 80 psi, and it's dropping. As the engine warms up, the oil pressure should drop down to around the 20 to 30 psi range, which is normal operating oil pressure. As you can see, as the engine's warmed to 112.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the oil pressure has also dropped as the engine is warming up. The oil pressure is now fluctuating just below 50, and as you can see, it's continuing to drop as the engine temperature increases. So our engine is now currently at 178 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around normal operating temperature for this Toyota engine. And you can see on the gauge that the oil pressure is around 30 to 31 psi, which is correct for this engine. Now, you can also see that as RPMs increase, the oil pressure is going to spike. It spiked around 80 psi with those RPM increases. We can conclude from all these tests that the oil pressure is correct on this vehicle and there are no problems. Now, when we shut the engine down, the oil pressure is going to drop to 0 psi, which is what should happen on a normally operating engine. Now, to conclude our oil pressure test, we're going to remove this fitting assembly from the oil pressure sending unit once the engine cools down a little bit, and we're going to put the oil pressure sending unit back onto this engine. As you can see, we've reinstalled the oil pressure sending unit back to its original position, and that will conclude our oil pressure test. This is Trenton Kicksmiller from AUT-150, and now you know how to do an oil pressure test.